guy who also now lives here in Miami, named Mike Arrington. And Mike Arrington has been a friend for a long time. And he said to me, he's like, Brad, in a long string of bad professional decisions, going to Ripple is your worst. He literally, when I took the job, he was like, what the hell are you doing? And I'll say, there were a whole bunch of people in crypto who at that time, even in 2014, 2015, when I was thinking about this, who frankly advised me against it. You know, for me to answer your core question, like I think there are waves of technology that happen that tend to last, let's call it 20 years, where there's amazing tailwinds of value creation and opportunity. I finished business school in 1997, which was an amazingly good time to come out of business school, given the birth of the internet, kind of in really the 1.0. And not surprisingly, perhaps there's a whole bunch of people from my business school class doing really interesting things in crypto, not the least of which is the CEO of Amazon, the guy named Andy Jassy. And I feel like one of the waves that is unfolding now is crypto and blockchain. I thought that 10 years ago. I had been exposed to Bitcoin in about 2012, and I owned some Bitcoin. But one of the things I always had this in my head is it's like, okay, wait a minute. Are we really going to rebuild the entire system devoid of government, devoid of banks? And I felt like that was a limiting factor. And so when I first heard about what Ripple was trying to do and trying to be really a bridge between traditional finance and what we're calling Web3 today, I thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And so the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll turn it back to you, but I also think risk tolerance is an important thing to think about in life. And at different times in your life, your risk tolerance should be higher or lower. It depends on who you are, what's going on in your life, all those things. By the time in 2015, I had been working in the tech space for 18 years. I had done well. And I had an opportunity actually to go work at Uber. And this is 2014, 2015. And that would have been a good outcome, meaning, I felt like, okay, I don't know if they were public yet, but it was right around that time. And I felt like, okay, that's going to be a good base hit, maybe a double, but is that going to change my life in any real way? And I was at a point where was willing to take risk. And I thought, the likelihood that what Ripple's doing is going to be successful is probably pretty low. But if it worked, the returns and the opportunity to have an impact was much, 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 much higher.
That's a great way of thinking about it. We just talked about that with Elon too, with SpaceX and some of his ideas. It's like those asymmetric returns, you have to have a higher risk profile. And I think he mentioned there's like a 10% chance SpaceX would actually succeed, but he said the work was so important to drive the world forward that I just had to do what was required. So you're at that unique inflection point. I guess for those who don't know as well, like what exactly is Ripple?
Yeah. And
why do you think Ripple is so important in the future of crypto?
So I'm going to go back to how Ripple was kind of envisioned way back in 2015 when I joined. And the whole thing came to fruition. I got a recruiting call. And I, frankly was avoiding the recruiter for a while, and a guy I like, but I just was, I say I was busy. I wasn't. I was driving for Uber at the time, just got bored. But
driving from Uber.
But his point to me is like, look, Brad, you've never met Chris Larson. Chris Larson is a guy who had started eLoan. He'd started Prosper. And Chris is just an exceptionally good, and just the ability to see around corners and where the world's going is a talent. And really, he has way more vision around that than I do. And when I met with him, he kept talking about this thing, an internet of value. And I had, at that time, I had not heard that expression. And he was talking about like all the different ways that value movement has friction that we've become a little bit numb to. I mean, this is going to sound a little bit pedestrian, but like I have to take my credit card out of my pocket. I have to take my wallet out to pay for something, as opposed that's friction.
Yeah.
It's friction there. They're also taking, somewhere between 100 bips and in some countries 800 bips for the privilege of processing that credit card. And so he's talking about all the different points of friction where an internet of value, if it existed, it would unlock use cases we don't even think about. I'll share one that may never come to fruition, but I remember him kind of pontificating about this, and that why not a self-driving car? If we get to the point of truly self-driving cars, and I think that's not if, but when, why not be able to pass value to the car in front of you to get out of the way so you can go faster? You're in rush hour traffic and you want to go a little bit faster. You're willing to pay whatever amount, and you could even put into some sort of system. I'm willing to pay this much to go this fast, and it would moderate based upon that. You would pass value to the cars around you.
Fascinating.
Today, you can't do that unless you're pitching dimes into somebody's convertible, right? Like it's not even pragmatic.
Right. Yeah.
But you think about, okay, in a internet of value, if value truly can move the way information moves today, okay. Now, look, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you could poke holes in that. That's never going to happen. And it creates weird incentives for going slow and getting paid to get out of the way kind of thing. But he really kind of introduced this idea of this internet of value and how for that to exist, you need certain oil in that engine to grease the system so that it can work. And XRP, the digital asset that Ripple has kind of standardized on, if you will, extremely fast, extremely low cost, and it could be an interesting use case for that. So, I think there's going to be lots of cryptos that win. You and I have talked about that before. Yeah. I think there'll be different use cases and different protocols and different technologies that will win. But his vision and kind of what he talked about and bridging the kind of traditional financial world with this next generation, at the time we weren't calling it Web3, it really appealed to me. One last thing I'll say about this that I think is something I thought about. I don't think there's that many times in your life where you get to do something where you really can, to borrow a Steve Jobs expression, put a dent in the universe. There have been a couple of times in my career where I feel like I've had that opportunity, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty unique. And when I thought about what Ripple is trying to do, it's one of these kind of audacious things of like, okay, we're going to enable an internet of value. We're going to build systems to catalyze that future vision. It's definitely one of those things. You're like, okay, if we do that, that's going to change the way some of these systems operate, and you're going to feel like I helped put a dent in the universe. And there's something I find personally gratifying about that. That it's not in kind of as Elon Musk for him. I think it was about, as you described, like it's important work for the world.
Yeah.
I think if you can unlock an internet of value, it's going to change a lot about how some of these things work. And I mean, passing money for self-driving cars, okay. But, there's also an underserved community that is not connected to the traditional financial system that has, if they could connect, could drive value. And you're seeing some of that play out with microloans in less successful economies. And that is helping people. Like, yeah. I think that there is an element, if you can really do this at scale, there's a lot of benefits to society that I think we underappreciate right now.
That's a great way of putting it. You've been at this for 9 years now, right?
I just passed my 9th anniversary.
9 years in probably the most volatile industry we've ever seen. I'm curious for you, over that 9-year period, what has been the highest high and what's been the lowest low for you?
The highest high, which admittedly was in and of itself an emotional roller coaster, and I have a tattoo referencing it on my left shoulder. July 13th, 2023, the court decision was issued by Judge Torres in the United States versus Ripple, and I guess to some degree Brad Garlinghouse. I mean, there are 3 cases really: one against me, one against Chris, and one against Ripple. And look, I think there's so many things about this that made no sense from the beginning that you couldn't really understand. But, when your life is in the hands of a judge, you don't really know. I mean, I believed deeply that we were right, but that moment, learning that we had, from my point of view, won all the things that we cared about, frankly, not just for Ripple, but for the industry, that was a big moment. That was a big high. But even that moment was an emotional roller coaster. I actually don't mind sharing. I haven't shared this publicly. I broke down crying.
Wow.
And because it was definitely like the weight of it. all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, like, all of this energy, all this time, all this money,
for
all
years.
this distraction. Oh yeah. Yeah. And so, well, I'll do the other, the lowest low to some degree, December 22nd, 2020, which is the day they filed the lawsuit. Now that wasn't the same because, when we won on July 13th, we didn't know the decision was coming out that day. I mean, it was definitely
Out of the blue.
Yes. Yeah.
That's remarkable. I'm curious because, well, congrats on winning that. I'm power to the people here. I love it. But when that lawsuit was first filed, it's so tough because you have such conviction of the future and what you can do for the world. But then you have the SEC, you have other law institutions that it's completely up in the air whether or not you're able to do this. And then internally with your company, you've sold them on a vision, they're bought in, they know what the technology can do, but there's so many unknowns there. How do you keep your team engaged and convicted in the midst of so much uncertainty and chaos and persecution? Like, how do you keep the team together and charge forward to get where you are today through all that?
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One of the values at Ripple, we have an acronym we use, Legos. One of them is the last one is say it. We are a very transparent organization. And so I think one of the ways, particularly in that time, and again, if you go back to when we got sued, it was a pretty dark time at Ripple. We had very high attrition the next 2 quarters. We weren't really sure, like, okay, can we still sell into customers?
Yeah.
Which it turned out outside the United States, we definitely could. Inside the United States, that was a different story. But I think making sure the team felt they were part of the journey, and we really over-indexed on transparency about what was going on, and wanted everyone to feel like, hey, here's exactly what we know and what we don't know. And I think people felt part of the mission. They felt part of, if anything, ironically, it brought us together.
Really?
Oh yeah.
That shared suffering.
For sure. Shared suffering, shared enemy.
Shared enemy.
The United States Securities Exchange Commission picked on Ripple. Like, of all the different things you could pick on, we were actively working with governments around the world. And it's like, it's still to this day, it's a strange, like, why? You'd think you'd pick weaker players. And I think they were surprised that we were just like, absolutely not. We are not rolling over. I mean, another thing which is sort of known publicly, but I had the opportunity personally to settle for what I would call relatively de minimis amount of money, where I could have just been out of it.
Really?
I could have been out of it. Chris Larson was out of it. They wouldn't do that with Ripple. But so what they're doing is trying to manipulate the narrative. Hey, we settled with the CEO. We settled with the chairman. But we're going to go after Ripple. They're a bad actor. It looks bad, but it would have been relative to where I was financially. It would have been de minimis, and frankly, for my life sanity of stress and maybe a better decision. It took and Chris and I had a lot of one-on-one personal conversations. Like, we're all in this together, and for one of us to have folded. It would have been tough for the company to stand in the face of that onslaught with, that. And so it was kind of an all for one for all thing. And
I love that. That's inspiring as hell.
Yeah. I mean, it was, but like, I don't want people to take away that like, oh, this was a no brainer. It was just like, particularly because I feel like the SEC was, I feel, malicious and manipulative and trying to get us to settle.
Yeah.
To create a narrative that Ripple's been a bad actor in some way.
I don't think people can fully empathize with how crazy of an adversary the United States government can be, and then the pressure that puts on a CEO like you in that position. So I'm curious for you, because there's a lot of founders out here listening to this that are going through their own shit, but might not be a fraction of the intensity of that. I'm curious from your standpoint, how did you stay mentally strong? Did you have any particular habits or systems?
Assuming I did stay mentally strong.
Well, you ended up lasting long enough to get here, but I'm curious, like, what was that like for you? And like, how did you navigate that and, parlay that into advice for other CEOs navigating their own uncertainties?
I mean, look, it takes conviction for sure.
Yeah.
I thought I was right. And we were in a position Ripple, the company, was in a financial position where we could fight. And I think, one of the hard things about what has happened in the crypto space is the SEC has been a bully. I mean, like, that's the right word. They're a bully because they go after weak players. And to your earlier point about the adversary of the SEC, I mean, one of the biggest problems here is they're not a rational capitalistic actor. There's no downside for them spending another $100 million of time, energy, and resource to file the appeal. Like, it's a little like if you're running a company and you sue Ripple and you lose a couple different things, which they have lost repeatedly against Ripple, you probably are like, okay, I'm out. Like, not
worth it. Yeah.
That natural incentive structure that exists in capitalism doesn't exist with a government actor. The people who brought the case, there's no negative outcome to them.
Yeah.
They were gone by the time the SEC lost. The people who continue to fight the case, there's no downside to them. The budgets, and so people ask, well, will the SEC continue to fight this fight? And it's like, well, I mean, to some degree, until there's a new administration, and I mean the SEC administration more than the White House.
Yes, definitely.
They're all in on fighting this fight, and there's no negative consequence to Gary Gensler to keep fighting the fight.
No, you're right.
Doesn't cost him a dime.
What do you think about the future in that regards then? Like, do you feel like the SEC is powerful enough to curtail the crypto industry as a whole, or do you think it's a matter of time?
Oh, they're going to lose in the long run.
They're going to lose in the long run.
Just
enough
this
time.
Is just, I mean, look, if you look at the continued growth of crypto as a multi-decade arc of time, this is nothing.
This is nothing.
It's a speed bump. Because I'm so optimistic about what the future of crypto looks like, we'll look back in 20 years and be like, God, that sucked. But you know what? Little bump, whatever. The market, in my opinion, the market will be measured in many, 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 many trillions.
Yeah.
And it will change the way many, many transactions work because it's a way to reduce friction, reduce cost, make things more efficient. It's going to win in the long run. The best technology usually wins in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think crypto, represents that. So I think it's unfortunate as a U.S. citizen to see the U.S. fall behind. You think about the geopolitical benefits to the United States and the United States economy that Internet 1.0 and Internet, Web 2.0 really were U.S. centric phenomena. And now Web 3.0, the U.S. is doing everything we can to make sure it's not a U.S. centric phenomena.
That's kind of crazy to me because we've always been at the forefront.
And massive trends. Value creation to be at the forefront.
Massive value creation.
Entrepreneurs, the smartest entrepreneurs from around the world want to come to the United States. In Web3, I mean, one of the first things I tell people that come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a company, I'm like, don't incorporate the United States. Why would you do that with a hostile government? The SEC has led the charge, but the OCC, I mean, look, why is it a political talking point about crypto? Why is Elizabeth Warren, I mean, she's saying things that are just not fact-based.
Yeah.
It's like you can say all you want about the things Trump says.
It's a script.
It's like, this doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
I don't even understand why
do you think the government is so afraid of Web3? Is it because it threatens their very existence in power structures where it's peer-to-peer, it's permissionless, they can no longer manipulate in the same way? Do you think it threatens their power structures, or why would we not get behind this as a government?
I mean, Chris, I wish I thought they were even smart enough to see some of the things you're saying. And I don't think that's it, because you have, leading governments, a bunch of G20 governments around the world leaning in. So if it was that people were worried about permissionless, I think if those were the issues, you'd see more G20 governments expressing lots of angst. But look, the UK is leaning in. Singapore is leaning in. The UAE is leaning in.
Yeah.
Frankly, Europe, Mika is kind of leaning in and saying these are here to stay. Look, I don't know, Brazil is not a G20 market, I don't think, but the Brazilian government's totally leaning in.
Yeah.
So, why is the U.S.? I mean, there's lots of things about the U.S. political system that I can't explain. So I think we skipped that part of the discussion. But, the support of innovation should be a bipartisan issue.
Absolutely.
Support of high value job creation should be a bipartisan issue. Why did this become partisan? How did it become partisan? I mean, the answer to my agree is somewhat Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren decided to make it some sort of talking point, I guess, in kind of an anti-capitalism way.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but some of the things I hear come out of Elizabeth Warren's office, I'm just like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's just kind of saying that everyone who used the internet in 1995 is a bad actor. I mean, do bad actors take advantage of new technologies? Yes. And they will continue to do so. And AI will be the next wave of bad guys using these technologies in bad ways. That doesn't mean we should get rid of AI. It doesn't mean we should get rid of it.
Exactly. They're like, oh, this can be used for trafficking and for arms dealing. I'm like, well, guess what currency is the number one right now? It's the US dollar.
Exactly right. I mean? Yeah, right.
It's crazy. So I'm curious for you now, sitting where we're at. I think Bitcoin or the industry as a whole, I think is at what, $2.5 trillion.
Yeah, right around there.
Market cap, roughly. Yeah. I guess just from your angle, you got a lot more intel and perspective than most, I'd say, in this industry. Like, where do you think where do you think we're going to be at the end of this cycle? Like, how big do you think the macro picture is going to look like? Any predictions you have in the next cycle?
Well, so I like the fact that you're saying cycle, not putting a specific time frame on it. I think I've been in crypto, really for maybe, over 10 years since I've owned Bitcoin, but 9 years at Ripple. The thing that's really hard for me to predict are the timelines.
Correct.
And so when I hear people are trading crypto, I always think, I don't think I could trade crypto. I mean, there's some patterns that I feel like I see, but I give my closest friends the advice of just like, you got to think long term. You can't think about where this is going to be in 5 weeks or 5 months. Where is it going to be in 5 years? I mean, frankly, I'd like to be able to say, like, think about where it's going to be in 50 years. And that goes into some core macro principles that I believe incredibly strongly in, which is we, unfortunately, as citizens of the world, can't trust our governments to manage monetary supply in a long-term responsible way. There's a lot of evidence to support that sentence, right? The US dollar, arguably the best managed currency in the world, has been devalued through inflation by, over 90% in the last 50 years.
Is it 90% in the last 50 years?
If you do that, like just an adjusted, what's $100,000
purchasing power?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible.
So, do we think that's going to get better or worse?
Wow. With the printing press.
I think it's probably going to get worse.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And that's the best managed currency. Yeah, and by the way, we can argue about that. Actually, I should retract that a little bit. One of the best managed currencies. I mean, the US dollars, I think many would say, if not the best and most.
And we're the reserve currency. Yeah.
But I mean, and that's the best one. So right. I think it's inevitable. And it's inevitable that, right now we talking about is $2.5 trillion. Do I think this is an easy 10X over the next 5 to 10 years? Yeah, no problem. That doesn't freak me out when I say that at all.
Like, that's conservative. If you
that feels safe. I mean, to the earlier conversation about asymmetric returns, is there a chance that it's 100X in that time frame? It feels aggressive, but I don't know. I think that many people in the United States particularly don't understand what it would be like to have lived in Argentina and have the Argentinian peso devalued effectively to zero multiple times in my lifetime. Why would you hold that currency?
We don't realize that could become us.
That's exactly the point, right? I think that we underestimate what that macro dynamic looks like over the long term. And so I'm, incredibly bullish. The reason I'm dodging the question only slightly because what's the timeline for this year? I mean, I have said publicly, I think that the market will be over 5 trillion by the end of this year, which is a double from where we are now. How that applies to Bitcoin versus XRP. I mean, people forget before the SEC got involved and said that ETH is not a security, XRP was the second most valuable digital asset.
Wow.
And that wasn't that long ago.
That wasn't long ago. What, 3-4 years?
It was 2018 when Hinman gave his speech. So 6 years, a little less than 6 years ago. Yeah. 5 years and change. And, look, when a government actor gets involved, markets change, and maybe that's to be expected.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you still have that government actor involved. Unfortunately, you still see, and I believe what I read usually, look, it appears the SEC is trying to mount a case against ETH. To me, that's absurd. To me, that's like, you've already lost a bunch. Why would you keep fighting this fight?
Yeah.
But look, unfortunately, I don't think the U.S. government should be putting their hands on the scale of winners and losers. In the long run, I think the best technologies applied with the best use cases, delivering the best utility, that they'll win. And what that looks like over the next 10 years, like, we can debate, but I'm very optimistic about the market.
Do you think there's any black swans?
Yeah.
Have you thought through any use cases? Like,
but you mean black swans on the positive or the negative?
Both, actually.
I guess is it a black swan if it's on
Maybe
the
it's a white swan.
A white swan. Yeah,
I don't know, whatever they'd call that, but like, yeah, I guess any unconventional, unorthodox, but like massive events that could really swing things one way or the other.
I mean, I think there will be events that are very difficult to predict. Maybe people can make fun of me, but I would have told you, let me think back to it. I guess it was 2 years ago, April 2 years ago, FTX held a conference in the Bahamas.
I was there. Yeah.
I was there as well. I remember leaving that conference thinking like, wow, FTX has emerged in a relatively short amount of time as like one of the power players in crypto. And I was impressed. I would have said at that time that FTX and Binance were the two most important, most influential, and probably SBF and CZ were the two most important players in crypto. Now you've got one definitively in jail, one, I guess, potentially headed to jail. I bring this up in context of black swans is like, it's hard to know, but on the positive, think about the freaking resilience of this industry and market that 2 years ago, somebody who I thought I knew a lot about what's going on in crypto, I would have said these are the two most important companies. The CEOs of the two most important companies now either are in jail or I think headed there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in some ways, I mean, the CZ stuff I'm less close to, and so I don't know as many details. But look, the resilience of the market, that should give us immense optimism.
Yes.
About what's coming. Do I think there's going to be another black swan? Of course, 100%. I just don't know exactly what it is. The only one that's going to be an interesting one to watch, and I don't even know how he calls a black swan, because I feel like black swan by definition can't really be, it's like
predicted.
Oh, didn't see that happening.
Yeah.
The U.S. government is going after Tether. That is clear to me. I view Tether as a very important part of the ecosystem, and I don't know how to predict
the impact that will have on the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Do you think, is it possible to take out Bitcoin, for instance? Like, do you think there's any sort of technological thing that could take out Bitcoin, high performance computing or quantum computing or any, there's a lot of rumors out there, but I'm curious from a technologist standpoint too, is like, are there any existential threats to the core asset propping this entire ecosystem up?
Yeah. I'm not smart enough to say yes.
Yeah.
I would say, look, as much as I think Chris Larson is genius level, being able to see around corners about where the world's going, David Schwartz, the chief technology officer at Ripple, and really one of the architects of the XRP ledger. I mean, this guy's genius level on technology that I'm just like, I'm in awe of being able to work with him. I did call him once, and I'm like, I had some conversation with somebody who's in quantum computing, and I was kind of like, should I be worried about this? And he walked me through why he felt this isn't like a little bit like that's a red herring. That's not a real thing. And he kind of explained to me why he felt that way. And so I won't bore people with kind of some of his arguments here, but I think there will be black swans. I don't think one of them is going to be the risk of quantum computing to the crypto market at large.
For people that aren't as deep into crypto and they're like curious, they're seeing there's a there obviously now. Who are some of the people that you really respect and admire kind of leading the charge in the crypto movement as a whole that you think people should be checking out?
I'm going to transparently kind of dodge this question a little bit. And the reason is some of the people I respect the most are intentionally behind the scenes.
Oh, interesting.
There's some people who I have immense respect for. And admittedly, I will share with you, some of them are kind of what I'd call Bitcoin maximalists.
Yeah.
But I respect the hell out of them. And, but yeah, they have chosen for a host of reasons that they're going to be in the background and try to influence. I will say, there's times when I would prefer that myself, but I also, it's not so nice. But I will also say, like, the industry needs spokespeople.
Yeah.
They need leaders who are stepping forward and representing the industry with central governments around the world, with central banks around the world. And we can't all just be anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto's.